The forest around Ashfall Kingdom was silent that night, except for the soft rustle of leaves and the quiet breathing of hundreds of wolves gathered beneath the ancient oaks. It was the night of the Crimson Moon ceremony, the one night every year when unmated wolves discovered who fate had chosen for them. Torches lined the clearing, casting a warm orange glow across nervous faces. Somewhere in the crowd, Leora Wren stood beside her older sister, Celine, trying to calm the fast beating of her own heart. Leora had never been the center of attention. She was quiet, thoughtful, and often overlooked, especially when standing next to Celine, who was bold, beautiful, and used to being noticed. Their whole lives, people had looked past Leora to admire her sister. Leora had learned to accept this. She did not resent Celine for it, not really. She simply believed that some people were meant to shine, and others were meant to stand quietly beside them. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something inside her chest fluttered with a strange, nervous hope. At the front of the gathering stood Kael Voss, the young Alpha King of Ashfall. He was strong, respected, and carried the weight of his kingdom with quiet confidence. Everyone knew this ceremony was important, not just for him, but for the entire pack. The Alpha King's mate would one day stand beside him as queen, guiding their people through peace and hardship alike. When Kael's eyes swept across the crowd, searching for the pull that would mark his true mate, they landed for a brief moment on Leora. In that instant, something inside her chest lit up like a spark catching flame. Her breath caught. Her whole body seemed to lean toward him without her permission. She knew, without a single doubt, that this was the mate bond everyone spoke of. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but before a single word could leave her lips, Celine stepped forward. "I feel it," Celine said, her voice loud and clear, carrying easily across the clearing. "I feel the pull. It's me." The crowd erupted into murmurs of excitement. Celine's confidence was contagious, and her beauty made the claim easy to believe. Kael, still slightly dazed from the mysterious fog that always clouded the senses during the ceremony, looked at Celine and hesitated only a moment before nodding slowly. He reached out and took her hand. Leora stood frozen. Around her, people were smiling, whispering, celebrating. No one turned to look at her. No one noticed the way her hands were trembling, or the way her throat had tightened around unspoken words. She thought about stepping forward, about telling the truth, about insisting that it was her, not her sister, that had felt the bond. But years of standing quietly in Celine's shadow had taught her one lesson very well. Some things simply were not meant to be hers. So she said nothing. That night, while the pack celebrated the joining of their Alpha King and his chosen mate, Leora packed a small bag and slipped away from Ashfall Kingdom without telling anyone. She left behind a short note for her parents, simply saying she needed to find her own path, and then she disappeared into the darkness of the forest, leaving her old life behind entirely. The following years were not easy for Leora. She traveled far from Ashfall, through territories she had never seen, among wolves who had never heard her name. At first, she was alone and unsure of herself, surviving on whatever work she could find. But slowly, something inside her began to change. Without her sister's shadow constantly beside her, Leora discovered parts of herself she never knew existed. She was clever, she was brave. She had a calm, steady way of thinking that helped her solve problems others could not. In the eastern wilds, far beyond the borders of Ashfall, Leora came across a cluster of packs locked in a bitter, decades-long conflict. Territories were disputed. Trust between packs had crumbled. Wolves lived in constant fear of the next attack. When Leora arrived, she did not announce herself as anyone special. She simply began helping, offering advice, mediating small disputes, and slowly earning the trust of pack leaders who had given up hope of ever finding peace. Over time, her quiet wisdom and fair judgment became impossible to ignore. Pack leaders who once refused to speak with each other began meeting at her request. She proposed solutions no one else had considered, always careful to listen to every side before speaking her own opinion. Little by little, the endless conflict began to ease. Alliances formed. Old wounds slowly started to heal. Years passed, and the packs of the eastern wilds united under a single banner, choosing Leora as their leader. They called her Queen Leora, ruler of the newly formed Eastern Accord. The girl who had once stood silently in her sister's shadow had become a leader respected and admired across the land. Stories of her wisdom and fairness spread far beyond her own territory, reaching even the distant kingdom of Ashfall, though no one there connected the legendary queen to the quiet girl who had vanished so long ago. Back in Ashfall, life had not gone the way anyone expected. Chaol and Celene's bond, celebrated so joyfully that night beneath the oaks, never felt right. Chaol told himself it was simply the pressure of leadership, or the natural adjustment of any new mating. But as months turned into years, the truth became harder to ignore. Being near Selene brought him no comfort. Her presence, instead of calming the restless energy inside him, often left him feeling more distant and alone. He told himself these feelings would fade with time. They never did. Selene, for her part, grew more focused on power than partnership. She enjoyed the title of queen far more than the responsibilities that came with it. Slowly, whispers began to spread through the pack, quiet murmurs about a bond that never seemed to fit quite right, about a queen who seemed more interested in status than in her people. Chaol heard these whispers but said nothing, burying his doubts beneath duty and denial. Years later, Ashfall found itself facing a growing threat from the Northern Territories, where hostile packs had begun expanding aggressively, threatening the fragile peace that had lasted for decades. Chaol, desperate to protect his kingdom, began reaching out to neighboring territories in search of allies. It was through these diplomatic efforts that he first heard of the Eastern Accord and its remarkable queen, a leader known for uniting warring packs through wisdom rather than force. Hoping to secure her support, Chaol requested an audience, never imagining who he would find waiting for him. The meeting was set in a grand hall within the Eastern Accord's territory, elegant yet simple, much like the reputation of its queen. Chaol arrived with a small group of advisors, prepared to negotiate carefully with a stranger, but the moment Queen Leora entered the hall, something inside him stopped completely. Their eyes met, and the same overwhelming pull he had felt once before, so many years ago beneath the oaks of Ashfall, struck him again, stronger and undeniable. This time, there was no fog to cloud his senses, no confusion to hide behind. He knew instantly, without any doubt, exactly who stood before him. Leora recognized him immediately as well, though her expression remained calm and composed. She had spent years learning to control her emotions, to lead with clarity rather than impulse, and she did not intend to let this moment shake the strength she had built for herself. "Alpha King Chaol," she said evenly, extending a formal greeting as any ruler would to another. "Welcome to the Eastern Accord." Chaol struggled to find his voice. The girl who had once faded quietly into a crowd now stood before him as a confident, respected leader, commanding the room with quiet authority. Guilt and disbelief rose within him in equal measure. "Leora," he said softly, unable to maintain the formal tone expected of the meeting, "it's really you." She did not flinch at the use of her old name, but neither did she offer any warmth in response. "It has been a long time," she said simply. "Shall we discuss the matter at hand?" Their negotiations proceeded carefully over the following days. Despite the storm of emotions clearly running beneath the surface, both rulers maintained a professional, respectful distance, focusing on the safety of their people rather than the painful history between them. Chaol found himself constantly torn between the urgency of his kingdom's need and the overwhelming realization of what he had lost so long ago. One evening, after a long day of discussions, Chaol found Leora standing alone on a balcony overlooking the Eastern Accord's peaceful lands. He approached slowly, unsure if she would welcome his presence. "I owe you the truth," he said quietly, standing a respectful distance away. "That night, at the ceremony, I felt something when I looked at you. I know now, it was the mate bond." But before I could understand what was happening, Selene stepped forward, and the fog from the ceremony made everything unclear. I made a mistake I never allowed myself to fully examine, because facing it meant admitting I had lost something I could never get back. Leora remained silent for a long moment, staring out over the moonlit hills. "I felt it too," she finally admitted. "But I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to speak up, that some things simply were not meant to be mine. Leaving Ashfall was the hardest decision I ever made, But it was also the moment I finally began to understand my own worth. Chaol turned to face her fully. I am not asking you to forget what happened, or to pretend the years we lost never mattered. I only want you to know the truth, and to know that the bond was always real, even if I failed to honor it. Leora studied him carefully, weighing his words against the quiet strength she had built over the years. The girl who left Ashfall that night might have forgiven you instantly, she said. But she no longer exists. I am not her anymore. I am the woman I became without you, and I will not simply set aside everything I built because fate has decided to complicate things once again. Chaol nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Then let me earn the trust I lost, he said. Not because fate demands it, but because I want to be worthy of the person you have become. In the weeks that followed, as the threat from the Northern Territories grew more urgent, Chaol and Leora worked closely together, combining their strengths to protect both their kingdoms. Slowly, carefully, something between them began to shift. Leora watched as Chaol proved himself not through empty words, but through consistent actions, respecting her leadership, valuing her opinions, and never once trying to diminish the strength she had earned on her own. Meanwhile, back in Ashfall, the truth about the false mate bond eventually came to light. Whispers that had lingered for years finally found solid ground, and Celene's claim to the throne unraveled completely under the weight of her own deception. Stripped of her title, she was left to face a pack that no longer trusted her, her ambition finally exposed for what it truly was. As the northern threat was pushed back through the combined strength of Ashfall and the Eastern Accord, a new kind of peace settled over both kingdoms. Chaol and Leora, having weathered years of separation and misunderstanding, found themselves standing together once more, though this time built on honesty rather than fate alone. It was Leora, in the end, who chose to open her heart again, not because the bond demanded it, but because she recognized the man Chaol had become, humble, patient, and finally worthy of the trust he was asking her to rebuild. Their union brought together two kingdoms once divided by distance and misunderstanding, uniting Ashfall and the Eastern Accord under a partnership built on mutual respect. The pact that had once celebrated a false bond beneath the ancient oaks now told a different story, one passed down through generations, of an alpha king who let his true mate slip quietly away, only to find her again years later, transformed into a legend in her own right. And in the quiet moments between the responsibilities of ruling two kingdoms, Chaol often found himself grateful, not for the mistake that had once cost him so much, but for the strength and wisdom Leora had gained because of it. She had not simply been given her place beside him. She had earned it, entirely on her own, long before he ever found his way back to her.